got it. Hi, Matthew.
I am.
I'm good. I'm good. It's early here though. How are you today? How are you feeling?
Yeah, I'm doing okay today. I'm feeling a bit icky because I had a PET scan yesterday, and that's the nuclear scan where they inject you with radioactive sugar. And
I was wondering what makes it nuclear.
yeah,
That's
the process itself is fine, but just yeah, usually a few hours later or a day later, your body notices that there's still radioactive sugar hanging around.
oh,
Yeah, it's not a lot of
do
fun.
you have like warnings not to get close to children and
You
things
do,
like that?
yes. So there's a lot of you have a lot of questions that you ask twice. So you're asked by the kind of the receptionist at the nuclear medicine department of the hospital. So they go through
Mm.
this kind of questionnaire with you. Of course, now they're asking about COVID stuff as well. Um, and yeah, they ask you like, do you have young children in the house? Do you take medicine for like diabetes or anything like that? Which I actually usually do. I don't have diabetes, but I'm taking a diabetes medicine because allegedly it has anti-cancer properties. I'm a bit skeptical, but it's cheap and has no side effects, so I take it.
Mm.
And yeah, then they ask you like a bunch of general health questions and also things like, do you have metal in your body and that kind of stuff? Again, which I do. I have some like little bits of gold in my liver from when I did proton beam therapy and they injected gold
Oh,
into my liver for targeting. Um, and then, yeah, and then you get changed and stuff. And then a nurse asks you exactly the same questions about 20 minutes later.
yeah,
Yes, they
yeah,
do kind of warn you, like, don't be holding small kids for the next day or two and that kind of thing.
yeah.
Because yeah, you mean you do become a
Because you're radioactive right now.
exactly. You don't get like amazing superpowers or anything.
How could you tell I was going to ask that?
You just feel a bit odd,
Yeah.
which is interesting, right?
Mm.
I don't know why your body even is able to recognize that this glucose, it's like a glucose injected in you, but one atom in the glucose is replaced by a radioactive label. Somehow your body
Mm.
notices.
Yeah.
Mm.
Something isn't the same.
But yes, other than that, I'm
Um,
mm.
right. Well, was it a couple of weeks? Was it a week, like a week or 2 weeks ago? You posted about reaching 7 years um after your initial terminal diagnosis.
Yes, I think it was probably a week and a half ago. Just kind of amazing.
Well,
I
yeah,
mean,
congratulations.
it's amazing to reach 7 years.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's kind of mind-boggling. Um, and I was wondering about. Well, it's funny that you've still got that. Well, not funny, but you've had 7 years of living with terminal cancer, and how sort of how does that feel?
It feels great. Um,
It's-
well, yeah.
Sorry,
I mean,
I
obviously, at some level, it feels great because I didn't imagine I would be
mm,
here seven
mm,
years later. So there's
yeah,
um, and yeah. I mean, it feels great in many ways, right? I'm very. It feels great to still be alive. I feel very
mm,
grateful to be alive. I am acutely aware that I'm mainly alive due to the actions of other people. And,
mm,
that, of course, the clinical practitioners who treat me, but also the scientists that, develop these treatments. But also, my sister who set up the crowdfunding and all the people
mm,
who donated to the crowdfunding that has allowed me to pay for the absolute best treatment in the world, um, which is this thing called adoptive cell transfer immunotherapy, um, and a bunch of other treatments. Um, and then people like you, dear Angie, who I've met bizarre set of circumstances. So a lot of it feels great.
Japanese brought us together.
Yeah, exactly. There is a lot of it's just very weird. Like it's particularly when I'm talking with other cancer patients, and just I mainly talk with stage 4 cancer patients, right? So terminal cancer patients, and it's just so normal for us to be talking about really technical medical stuff, really horrific emotional stuff, like, what's it like when I remember when I was first diagnosed, and there's a lot of trauma just because you've got this horrific news, and that causes you to like lose your memory about stuff before the bad news, and you have a lot of trouble sleeping because of the trauma but also the treatments. So you're in this like exhausted, emotionally broken state. And yeah, most of the terminal cancer patients I've talked to, we've all had this experience more or less, and it's just a really normal thing we talk about. And then also all the weird side effects we talk about. So cancer patients love to talk about this thing called chemo brain, which is like a mental fog you get from chemotherapy. And it's one of those things that's poorly understood in the medical world. It's probably a whole combination of things, like nerve damage from the chemotherapy drug itself, but also just fatigue from the chemotherapy drug. And probably some other stuff as well. So we're just kind of throwing around this jargon and talking about this horrific stuff as if it's just completely normal, because for us this is just what we deal with every day. So there's a lot of like surreal stuff, I guess. Yeah.
I mean,
Odd, I
is
guess.
it? Sorry?
It feels really odd. I think terminal cancer is like the best way of putting it. It feels really, really strange. It never becomes normal for long. You might have times of normality, and remember like, oh, this might be the last few days I have, or that kind of thing, or last few weeks I have, or that kind of thing.
That would certainly change, affect how you view, how you plan, and how you, I imagine it was how you, sorry, I'm getting a bit lost in, I was just thinking along with that, how normal it is to be discussing some of these really heavy things with other cancer patients, and is there a sort of relief in those things?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. That it's just being able to talk to people who just instantly understand.
So you have to do a lot of explaining to me.
Yeah, it's exactly. So when you're talking to people who haven't experienced it, a lot of it, like, so one thing with cancer treatments is you have lots and lots and lots of side effects. It's not just like one or two side effects, it's lots of side effects, and it's like the side effects wage a campaign of attrition against you. So things that don't seem like such a big deal, like when it's combined with a whole bunch of things, it's really bad. So something that sounds really stupid is you're often given a steroid called Decadron, I think. And one of the side effects is it makes you sneeze a lot. Another side effect is it makes you very hungry. Now, that kind of sounds like, so what? But sneezing for, 30 minutes is quite unpleasant, especially if you've recently had surgery. So every time you sneeze, it feels like your stitches are all ripping open. Or if you just spend 30 minutes vomiting from chemo, and you have like your half an hour sleep. And then, as I mentioned, it makes you feel hungry, and feeling hungry when you can't eat because you also feel nauseous from chemo, or you're just exhausted. That, so it's like, yeah, the side effects, if you speak to someone who's not really familiar with them, they sound kind of not terrible, like, well, what's so bad about nausea? So now there are lots of
Nausea is a
ways.
really hard thing to even describe, though. If you,
Yeah, exactly.
uh,
And people say, oh well, maybe it's not as bad as actually being sick, is it? Well, in many ways it's much worse, having like hours at a time where you just feel seasick or whatever and are unable to like physically vomit.
mm,
Yeah. And another thing is that chemotherapy affects your nails. Well, you think, so what? But to have like your nails repeatedly ripped off, maybe when you tie up your shoelaces, is a classic one. Or
mm,
to kind of lose nails or bits of your toenails, making walking very difficult. So the chemotherapy, like, yeah, softens the nails, it attacks the nail bed, so like that soft bit of flesh under the nails,
yeah.
often to the point that it bleeds, especially your toes. So that kind of
Mm,
feeling of, yeah, taking off your socks and they're like soaps in blood, yeah, okay. And chemo patients just instantly, you just say the words and they're like, there's this kind of wave of recognition.
yeah.
Yeah, so there's a lot of relief in discussing it with people. And when I try to make videos that are for cancer carers as well as for cancer patients, I do struggle with it, but I do make a real effort to try and explain it in terms that people might understand.
Mm,
Like fatigue is a really, I never appreciated how bad fatigue was, because chemotherapy induced fatigue is very similar to like there's like chronic fatigue illnesses, like ME being the most famous one, right?
mm,
And what it means, it's different from normal fatigue. So normal fatigue is when you can't do what you'd normally be able to do. So like, you've run 20 kilometers and you're now fatigued and you can't run another 5 kilometers. But if you hadn't run 20 kilometers, you would be able to run 5 kilometers, right? That's like the definition of fatigue. But when you rest, your performance level returns, right? So you've run your 20 kilometers, you eat something, take a rest, maybe sleep. Next morning, you can do 5 kilometers. But with things like ME or with chemotherapy induced fatigue, rest doesn't relieve it. So
mm,
I've always heard of like ME patients saying, they go to sleep and wake up just as tired after like a full night's sleep. Well, yeah, I now understand what that means because I've
yeah.
experienced it many, many, many times from chemotherapy. The only thing
Mm,
that most people find that helps with this kind of fatigue is light exercise, but then there's a whole lot of barriers to doing that when
yeah.
you can't walk well because
When your nails are falling off and
exactly, yeah.
yeah.
Um, BS, back to your
Mm,
original question, yes, I feel uh, indescribable relief being able to talk this, and it's one of the great things about the web. I'm no fan of social media or technology in general, but to be able to
mm.
like meet up with people online and kind of just complain about what it's like is fantastic. Or share practical strategies as well.
Yeah,
That's awesome as well.
yeah, yeah. That I mean, I know you enjoy a gripe now and again, but just for enjoyment's sake. But you seem more practically minded as a
Yeah,
with
yeah.
going into things.
It's the side effects are very specific to the people and the combination of treatments,
Mm,
and what works to alleviate the side effects is also very specific to them. So you do
mm,
basically, the best strategy is talk to as many people as possible and
mm,
try out the different things for a while, keeping notes of whether they work or not. Because a lot of
mm,
things you get a lot of skin issues with chemotherapy, and most skin drugs you essentially going to need to do for 3 or 4 days before you see any result.
Mm.
Yeah, so kind of taking notes is really, really important. Not just trying something once and saying, well, I've still got the rash the next day, this doesn't work. Or yes,
That seems to be one of the kind of worst conflicts, it sounds like, from my perspective, is that just the amount of work you have to put in
yeah,
having cancer to be an expert in yourself, to try and find what does work.
yeah, and an interesting thing is, because when your friends first hear you've got cancer, it's very natural for everyone to say, like, oh, here's some books to read in hospital, or here's some DVDs you should really watch sometime, or this comedy series would cheer you up. But as a cancer patient, late stage cancer patient, you're typically very, very, very busy.
Mm.
You're busy traveling to and from hospitals and clinics. You're busy doing online research to try and find more treatments. You're busy kind of spending any scraps of time you can with friends and family. I'm busy answering emails and messages from cancer patients around the world who have kind of heard about my story, the 7 years of,
That's
survival, when I had 7 to 9 months, maybe was a realistic prognosis in July 2016. It's now July 2023. Yeah. So yes, we are quite busy.
not everyone does kind of invite and uh, what speak to a lot of other cancer patients, and I'm sorry, and run groups to help other cancer patients, and um, courses for people as well. What I'm saying is that you're a little bit of an outlier in how busy you've made yourself in that
Yeah,
respect.
yeah, I think that's a fair comment. I mean, I think even if you don't do much really active stuff as a cancer patient, you're still busy because you're sometimes, like, your usable time may be quite limited, right? So if you're on a heavy chemotherapy protocol, so as a late stage cancer patient, you're typically given multiple chemo drugs at the same time, sometimes with molecular targeted therapy as well. And that might be on a 2-week cycle or 3-week cycle. And yeah, you may be unwell for like a week after the chemotherapy treatment at the hospital. So you may have like a day of treatment at the hospital, be unwell for a week, and then start to get better. And you've essentially got a week to get all your stuff done. I mean, that could be, buying birthday presents for a friend or family member, or just the normal admin stuff that we have to do, paying bills, getting stuff in order. Yeah, so there's the whole kind of, the treatment takes time, the self-care takes time, but just your daily life takes time as well. And somehow you have to squeeze doing some fun stuff into that as well. If I personally don't like fun, but I've heard some other people do. So doing some fun things as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you make time for punishing training regimes.
Well, yeah, and again, kind of, what like old people say, you have to make hay when the sun shines. And that's something I'd completely forgotten, is that when you are feeling okay, you feel, oh, this is the day I've got to do all the stuff that I couldn't do, like physical things or whatever. And also, oh, I'm meant to do some exercise as well because I might suddenly be really sick. My treatment may suddenly stop working and I might have to go on a heavier treatment, or if it's in a treatment break, I may have to restart treatment or whatever. So there's that kind of
You
weird
can't
feeling of like, I'm someone that kind of needs to like have plans and stuff to keep me motivated, but
you
then
can't rely on
yeah,
that future, that plan.
yeah, you can't
Well,
assume
that's
that you can have a tomorrow to go do the stuff,
yeah,
which is interesting and weird and very weird.
yeah. I
Uh,
mean, it
is this how
sounds
like
like
super successful executives feel when they've got like loads of stuff? I mean, you know, I'm like the opposite of successful in many ways, but I don't know, is this what it's like for them when they're on their conference calls with 3 different time zones and, you know,
mm,
whisked away to places in a limousine and people are lining up to ask them to sign documents and that kind of thing. Yeah,
yeah. Well, there's a lot of parallels there.
it's a, it's,
You're living your busy executive life. Like,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, the dream is like the nightmare, maybe.
yeah, yeah. To be honest, that never really sounded like an appealing life to me, but I guess it's a form of success. Yeah.
Yeah, because, I mean, the executive gets the reward of like the multiple homes and yeah, company skiing trips, all that kind of stuff. And as the cancer patient, your your reward may be slightly reduced side effects if you do everything right, and also
Mm,
no idea of no way of knowing like, well, if I had done everything wrong, would I feel just the same, right? So there's this kind of always this thing of like, that does what I'm doing make any difference at all, you know?
mm.
um yeah, I find it particularly with skincare that kind of, you know, when I was on a heavy chemotherapy protocol, it was a 3-step skincare thing done 3 times a day. So you're putting like an antibiotic on, a steroid on, and a medicinal moisturizer. So you're putting like an ointment, or oily ointment, and a cream and a lotion 3 times a day, and it feels horrible. And the chemo rash you often get on your back and chest. So then, of course, all the clothes stick to you, and when you sleep,
Mm.
the pillow is covered with this nasty stuff. And you just think you're still getting the skin rash, and you have to think, well, if I stopped, would it be worse? I don't know, and you have no idea. And when you quiz the doctors, they might say, oh well, there was some research done 20 years ago where, you know, 54% of the patients reported feeling slightly less itchy following this skin
Mm.
routine. I think, is this really worth it? um
I- Is the rash sort of at risk of having sort of getting infected?
well, a lot of the rash is infection, right? So
Right.
because if you think like chemotherapy tends to kill all of, like, stuff, you know, humans have a lot of stuff living in us, a lot of, you know,
Mm.
as the probiotic marketing always says, like, you know, you've got all your good gut bacteria, that kind of thing. Well, you also have good bacteria and also plants living on your skin, like the biofauna, and chemo and other drugs kind of can wipe this stuff out, and then you're very open to
You've just opened up I didn't know we had plants on
yeah,
us.
we've got
Opened up a whole other world.
yeah, it's called your skin biofauna or biotica, and you know, in the last few years there's all this talk about the human biome.
Mm.
You know, I mean, humans, I think on average we have something like 400 parasites living in us at any one time, and in theory some of these are
Guests.
harmful, but apparently, yeah, when you don't have them, then again you can be open to very serious
Mm.
illnesses. And of course, you know, we
Mm.
know, like, when you're given like a course of harsh antibiotics for something, you tend to have quite long lasting side effects, gastrointestinal side effects, because the antibiotics also knock out all the the so-called good gut bacteria that may take 6 months to like kind of regrow, right? Yes. So yes, so another interesting thing of cancer is you do learn a lot of marvelous things about the human body.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you do, and you think you are a person who seems like I've only known you since
Been years.
well after you had years after you were diagnosed with cancer. So I guess I don't know what you were like before, but you were still you were in the hacker world and a curious person. So you naturally educate yourself.
Yeah, I think
And
I try to educate myself, and I also think a big part of the hacker mindset is this idea of looking at the world as having many layers, and sometimes you can get a lot of progress in one layer by doing work in another layer. A bit like, when we were kids and you play video games, occasionally there were games where like there was a cheat mode where you could break out of a layer, right? Like maybe you were a famous example would be those id games like maybe Doom 2 or something, where there was a cheat where you could essentially turn off the collisions with walls, and then it would allow you just to move through walls. Or you might have a racing car game on a track where there was some kind of glitch where you could get off the track and then avoid all the other cars and just go whiz along, or shortcuts in Mario or whatever, kind of thing. And I think part of the hacker mindset is that we know the world is like that too. And so, I mean, one thing I found with my medical treatment is I'm often, because my Japanese is poor and I'm getting treatment in Japan, I get the top doctors because they're the ones that have a good level of English, because they've often worked abroad. So the person who did my last surgery, he was head of surgery at this big teaching hospital. And part of that was because he had been at Royal Marsden in London, and also one of the, I think, Houston Medical Center. So he had worked abroad in other hospital systems, and that meant he was very kind of open-minded. And because I'm often with very senior clinical staff, and because I have at least some knowledge about cancer, I'm able to talk with them in a way that a patient wouldn't usually be able to talk with a doctor or nurse. Because they're quite powerful, it does give you lots of shortcuts. So, I remember one time I'd gone to see a liver surgeon for a follow-up thing, like a follow-up checkup, and it was a place 2 hours north of Tokyo by bullet train, and it was late-ish, and I needed he was like wondering if I could stay for the next day for an ultrasound, and I said, like, I really want to get back to Tokyo. And because he was senior member of staff, even though the ultrasound department had closed down, he was able to call up, get a technician to bring a mobile machine over, and then a surgeon did the ultrasound then and there. And it's like, first of all, the surgeon was doing ultrasound, which is, he had done my liver surgery, so that was really good because he remembered what my liver was like, and so just that kind of thing happens quite often. I find like medical staff will bend rules for me. They'll kind of call up their friends who are also senior medical staff at other hospitals who will like see me without appointments and this kind of thing. I did my radiotherapy in Tokyo with a top radiotherapist. There's a long waiting list, and I got in like the next week because he was a friend of someone at the immunotherapy clinic. So yeah, we find these kind of shortcuts. And also I think when computer hackers, you're often in a situation where you have to read very technical stuff that is far outside of your area of expertise, but you still have to make sense of it. Like you might be reading documentation for a computer system that you are testing, and maybe with or without permission from the owner. And you have to quickly understand documentation that a normal worker might be sent on a 3-week course for. So for us, reading like clinical papers that we don't have any of the foundational knowledge for, but we still are able to kind of read it and make sense of it. And if
But that's a big hurdle for probably most people. There are a lot of people face.
yes,
Like,
if only there was someone, Angie, making useful videos and content for cancer patients and carers.
yeah.
This wasn't planned, but yes, I've just recently started a new video series, questions for cancer patients and carers. I've done like 30 videos so far, and these are just
Oh my gosh.
questions like is chemotherapy, and what's the difference between an MRI scan and a CT scan, and how do you read a blood test report, and just this kind of stuff that is very routine for me after 7 years. But if you're facing it for the first time, or if it's just very beyond what you'd usually be comfortable with. I mean, I know people that they are put off by numbers and confusing units and blood test reports.
Yeah.
Intimidating.
I mean, there's enough scary things going on when you're diagnosed with cancer. Do you remember any time when you weren't curious and that felt like you could find things out for yourself?
It sounds corny, but like a lot of kids, I was very inspired by the books I read early on. The kind of, the Usborne books, where there was like, the Usborne Book of the Future or Usborne Guide to Robots, and they'd have these bizarre pictures of people in, these are books probably written in the 1970s, and they were saying like, in the 1980s we'll all be living on the moon. And
I don't think I had those ones.
I always remember there's a picture of like these people on the roof of their house in a flood, and these robotic life rafts coming to rescue them. I think all that kind of stuff made me curious, and just that feeling of like, oh, is there some more to life than we see on the surface? How does stuff work? Particularly the everyday stuff we see. So like, how do locks work? Like you stick a key in a lock and turn it. How does it lock? Why can't it unlock with a different key? And is there a way to trick the lock into opening without the right key? And all this kind of stuff. And I think that mindset is maybe now becoming more common. I mean, people talk about like travel hacks or, fast food hacks. Like, are there combination of things you can order on a menu that's cheaper than getting the promotional set, or just this kind of weird stuff, right?
Yeah.
So I think people are a bit more familiar with this kind of stuff now.
Yeah.
But yeah, for me, I've always just been curious, and I think a lot of it came from those reading early on those books and this formative television that I watched as a kid. I like to believe that I was a child in the golden age of children's television in the 80s and early 90s, where they were still showing good stuff from the 70s. And if you look back and watch it now as an adult, it was just the most surreal, weirdest stuff you could possibly imagine. I mean, things like, everything.
And you regularly do.
Yeah, exactly. I watched it for nostalgic purposes, and you watch that British kids TV from the 70s and 80s, and you wonder how they got away with showing some of it. It was just so unsettling, and some of it quite scary, but it massively opened up your mind. I mean,
One thing that popped up from that era of television because of the recent Threads release was the TV film, was it Threads?
yes,
Was it? That keeps popping up in my feed.
yeah, and again, I watched that as an adult, but I had watched stuff like When the Wind Blows, which is the Raymond Briggs animation, and it's actually, again, quite the parallels to terminal cancer are quite interesting, because there's a husband and wife, and it's it's in the period called transition to war, right, which was this idea when the Cold War becomes a hot war in Europe, and the husband is very much kind of believing the government information pamphlets and stuff, and the wife is a bit more skeptical, and does not have a happy ending, the series, the animation. But I think, yeah, being skeptical and this idea of going upstream. So like when you're told something, you want to kind of dig into the origins a bit. If someone says this drug is safe, it's been proven in the clinical trial, I wonder how many people in that clinical trial, and how close was their disease to mine, and how similar am I to the patients in that trial. Because sometimes doctors will brandish the bit of paper which was like a 100-person trial from 1983, and it's like there's no relevance to me at all. Yeah, I'm living in a different time with different drugs available, and yeah, why would I think this is the best drug available because it was shown in 1983 to be marginally better than no treatment at all, or whatever the trial was looking at. So yeah,
I mean, if it was that kind of distance, it's like massively out of date information. That's
yeah,
that's what you get a lot of the time from what you say. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
I worry about that though in myself. Like I'm curious about things. I always like to dig deeper, but if I'm being told something, I have a real inclination to just accept what people are telling me. Especially if they're say if it was a doctor, I might ask them why they think this and talk about it. But I have an over tendency to accept what I'm being told.
Everyone does, and one reason is we're trained that way from childhood. We're trained to respect authority or defer to authority. Also, when you are hearing about something you don't know about, you're more likely to believe the source. So the classic example is, so you're very knowledgeable about the automotive industry. If you were reading a magazine and you saw an article about the automotive industry, you might read through it and you might find 20 points that are incorrect. And then you turn to the next page and there's an article about weaving in the foothills of the Himalayas, and it might be a subject you know nothing about, and you take the article completely at face value, even though it's in the same magazine, and you found 10 or 20 errors in the previous article. But so we're very good at recognizing mistakes and things when it's an area of our expertise, and yet we'll just take it at face value what other people say. Particularly if you're frightened, or particularly if you're tired, and you're often frightened and tired as a patient, so often making decisions in the worst possible
What
circumstance.
was that
HALT.
acronym for HALT?
Do not make decisions when you are hungry, angry, lonely, or tired.
I kept forgetting the lonely one. That seemed like out of place.
Well, yeah, and you know, I guess we should wrap up now because I know you
Yeah.
have a life beyond cancer, unlike me, Angie. But I absolutely must talk about the loneliness, because there is a kind of a loneliness, you know, that, yeah, you're like, you're experiencing something that's very, very, very difficult for to understand. And to some extent, you wouldn't want other people to understand it because you really don't want them to have any of these kind of things. Because it's really not nice. Yeah, so there's that kind of that loneliness. Particularly, I felt loneliness, things like when I was physically vomiting for hours, and it's like no one can do anything. Now if you're in a hospital situation, it's kind of, you know, I mean, Japanese nurses are just outstanding. Like I mean, nurses everywhere are wonderful, obviously, but I don't know, the Japanese nurses, they I don't know if it's their training or if they just have this instinct of like how to comfort people. Yeah, but they're able to comfort you. But if you're not in a hospital setting, and you're in a lot of physical pain, or you're in a very traumatic in a physically traumatic situation, you feel you can have like this instant kind of tsunami of loneliness. And other times, like, you know, just when it's late at night and you can't sleep because you're nauseous and you maybe have to sit up because of the body position you need to be in to minimize the pain. It's just sat in bed trying to get to sleep. And yeah, I have to say again, this is one of those things where technology has helped so much, because if you're lucky enough to have a smartphone or tablet or whatever, you can then at least, yeah, sit there maybe chatting to other people, maybe other cancer patients, and you do get connected to kind of amazing people, and you do in the cancer world, you come across many inspiring people all the time. It's just like a normal thing. Just like, you know, when things are tough, you find somebody's just like been through 10 times as much, and they're still grinning, and it's like, wow, how do they do it? It's kind of
Yeah. Well, that's like one of the first bits of advice I think you've given in other sort of, when you did that cancer information course
yeah
last year. Is don't or even when you wrote out your list of things to do, is not doing it alone. I've gone really
yeah
silly. Sorry.
yeah absolutely. There's that, I can't remember who came up with it, but the 3-step plan to overcome any adversity. Step 1 is don't worry alone, which means tell other people. I mean, to choose carefully who you tell. Step 2, get the facts, and step 3, make a plan. And like, even a rubbish plan is better than no plan. Yeah, and particularly if you can find people who empathize without sympathizing too much, because, you know, if people sympathize a lot, and being sympathetic is lovely, but, you know, if you tell
You try not to hurt my feelings.
no, I think you're very empathetic as well. Like you do try hard to feel what other people are feeling, and then that allows you sometimes to kind of help find something to alleviate that, or find a practical solution, or
Well, I've heard.
just prompt the person for what's the next step. You know, like if you're not in pain and you're describing to someone your pain and all they can say is like, oh, that sounds terrible, I'd hate to be you, that sometimes makes the situation a bit worse. But if they say, oh, I can imagine, I can imagine how you feel, I had a similar experience, or I can't imagine how you feel, but is there anything we can do to help? Because often, particularly when you're undergoing heavy treatment, often you just feel kind of quite helpless, even like with very mundane things, like you need someone just to go and get something for you, like get me an ice pack because my head feels it's on fire, or if you can get me another cushion or pillow, then I can sit up a bit more and I'll maybe have less of a feeling that like stomach acid is coming up my throat or whatever.
I suppose you want a level of empathy to not in the people around you, so that you're not having to constantly explain that. Have some of it preempted.
It's very difficult for the people around you because you may be fine one day and really bad the next, or you may be fine one treatment cycle and then the next time you have bad side effects. Or, I mean, with food, it's a big deal because the various treatments can change your sense of smell and taste temporarily or permanently. So sometimes, your favorite food might like repulse you or whatever. But maybe we should wrap up now, as you've given me so much of your time. But if there's
but I do have to head off.
And get on with your life, Angie. Yes,
I get on with my Wednesday.
Talking to you, and yes, and if anyone watching this does need help in any way, they can just comment or reach out to me, find me on Facebook, and I will do whatever I can. I'm often slow to reply, but I do try and get back to everyone, and I do try and do as much as I can to help out other people. So if you're watching this, please get in touch. And if you can make a donation to my crowdfunding, that allows me to help people, basically pays for like just costs of like going to the clinic to see other patients when it's not one of my treatment days, or that kind of thing. So yeah, donations help a lot, and I think Angie will probably put the donation link under this video. So
very well.
Yeah, and thanks for watching, and thank you, Angie.
Oh, thank you. Have a good. I don't know what time is it there. Have a good
2:30 on Wednesday afternoon.
Oh, have
yes. So
have a great day.
Stop recording now.